New York nights. The city shines brightly with lights, and I am nothing more than a shadow drifting through the streets, carrying the stories of others, while quietly burying my own. My name is Michael, 42 years old, and I've been driving night shifts for 15 years. At first, this job was only temporary, a way for me to help Emma achieve the dreams she held close to her heart. But month after month, year after year, it became the only work I knew. Emma is the reason I chose this silent life. Once a vibrant, hopeful woman, she was always filled with energy and a desire to explore. I loved her from the first moment I saw her, the day she stepped into my cab with that radiant smile. And from that moment, I vowed to do anything it took to make her happy. I remember the early days of our relationship, when Emma was still just my girlfriend, and I was just a lovesick man with a desperate heart, wanting to protect and keep her close. We once dreamed together of distant travels, of a little house with a garden full of flowers. But life is rarely as simple as those early promises. When our first daughter was born, I made the decision to work extra night shifts to provide for our family. Emma supported me. She said she was proud of me, that I was a good husband, a devoted father. Those words were enough to make me forget the exhaustion, the loneliness of being out on those late-night streets, unnoticed by anyone. But sometimes, as I look in the rearview mirror, I see a man with tired eyes, a forgotten shadow. I ask myself if I've given so much to my family that I've left nothing for myself. The cold nights fill me with a strange emptiness. I love my job because it gives us stability, but I hate it because I know I'm slowly losing the woman I love. There are nights, coming home just before dawn, when I watch Emma sleeping soundly next to our daughter. Watching them like this is the only time I feel any peace. I sit beside them quietly, watching the softness of her face as she sleeps. My hand reaches out, brushing through her hair so gently, as if even a slight movement might make all I treasure disappear. But Emma doesn't know this. She doesn't know how scared I've been to lose her. Sometimes, in my dreams, I'm just a driver, lost in a city, searching for light but finding only shadows. Each night, as I drive through the busy streets, my mind drifts to Emma, her smile, the time she would lean against my shoulder when we were young. But now, those memories seem like a distant echo. She no longer waits for me to come home, she no longer texts to see if I'm okay. Some nights, by the time I return, she's already fallen asleep, never realizing I'd arrived. I used to wonder if she still loved me the way she did before. I know that the weight of life and work has made me a faded figure in her eyes, but I still believe that, deep down, she loves me. Perhaps our love isn't as bright and urgent as it once was, but for me, it remains steady, like a lighthouse guiding me through a dark sea. Maybe that's my mistake. Maybe I've been too confident in the love I thought she held for me, too blind to see that sacrifices alone aren't enough. But tonight, as I drive through these familiar streets, I feel a strange sense of dread. An unspoken fear creeps into my heart, a whisper that perhaps the love I've counted on isn't strong enough to keep her. Outside my window, the city lights shine brightly, but inside, I am left with a growing darkness. Just a lonely shadow in a sea of light. I move forward, unaware of what I've already lost until it's entirely gone. It started with small things. Little changes in Emma's behavior that seemed insignificant at first, but as they piled up, they began to feel like heavy stones pressing down on me. Emma had always been open, laughing easily, talking about her day, her plans, her dreams. Lately, though, I noticed a shift. She would glance away when I asked about her day, or offer me a distracted smile as she looked at her phone. I told myself it was nothing, just the exhaustion of work and life, but that nagging feeling wouldn't leave. The first night she went out without an explanation, I convinced myself I was overthinking. She said she was meeting an old friend, someone she hadn't seen in years. I wanted to believe her, I truly did. But there was something about her manner, the way she left quickly, glancing at me without quite meeting my eyes, that made my stomach clench with worry. I spent that evening in a fog of uncertainty. The house felt empty, colder somehow, without her presence. I went to check on our daughter, sleeping soundly in her bed, her little hand clutching a stuffed bear. Watching her, I felt a twinge of guilt. I wondered if I was being foolish, reading too much into things that weren't there. Emma was my wife, the woman I had given my life to. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. But as the nights went by, her absences grew more frequent. There were more bold friends, and work dinners, excuses that felt increasingly thin. I began to sense an invisible wall between us, a distance that I couldn't bridge no matter how hard I tried. Every time I reached out to her, trying to bring back the closeness we once had, she would slip away, like sand slipping through my fingers. One night, I decided I couldn't bear it any longer. After Emma left, I took my coat and went out into the chilly night. I told myself I just needed some air, but my heart knew what I was looking for. It didn't take long to find her. She was only a few blocks away, standing under a streetlight, laughing softly with a man I didn't recognize. I stood there, frozen, as if my heart had stopped beating. I watched them, my wife and this stranger, their faces close, her smile radiant in a way I hadn't seen in years. She looked at him with a light in her eyes that I hadn't seen for a long time, something warm, something secret. I wanted to walk over, to confront them, to demand an explanation. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, overwhelmed by the sudden, undeniable truth. She was slipping away from me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The drive home felt like a blur. I barely noticed the familiar streets, the lights blurring past as I tried to grasp what I had seen. My hands trembled on the wheel, and I felt a deep, gnawing ache in my chest. I had given Emma everything, my time, my love, my life. But somehow, it wasn't enough. That night, lying in bed beside her, the silence between us felt louder than ever. I wanted to reach out, to pull her close and beg her to come back to me. But the words caught in my throat, and all I could do was lie there, staring up at the ceiling, wondering if I had already lost her. The days following that night were like walking through fog. I went through the motions, driving, coming home, playing with my daughter, but everything felt distant, as though I were watching my life from outside myself. The memory of Emma with that man under the streetlight played on an endless loop in my mind, each time hitting harder, sinking deeper into my chest. I didn't know how to approach her. Part of me feared that if I asked, if I dared to break this fragile peace between us, I'd hear a truth that I wasn't ready to face. But the other part of me couldn't bear the weight of uncertainty any longer. It felt like I was losing my grip, slowly falling apart, piece by piece. Finally, one night as she prepared for yet another meeting, I couldn't hold it in any longer. She was fixing her hair in front of the mirror, humming softly, oblivious to the storm raging within me. I took a deep breath, clenching my hands to keep them from shaking, and stepped into the room. "Emma," I said, my voice betraying me with a slight tremor. She glanced over her shoulder, her smile fading as she caught sight of my face. "I need to talk to you." There was a long pause, a heavy silence that settled between us like a weight. She turned slowly, her hands dropping to her sides. Her eyes met mine, but the warmth I once knew was gone, replaced by something unreadable, something distant. "What is it, Michael?" Her voice was soft, almost cautious. I struggled to find the words, the right way to say what had been gnawing at me. But as I looked at her, the frustration, the pain I'd been holding back surged to the surface. "Where do you go every night, Emma?" The question slipped out, harsher than I intended. Her eyes widened, a flicker of guilt flashing across her face before she quickly looked away. "It's work," she mumbled, her gaze fixed on the floor. But the way her voice wavered, the way she refused to meet my eyes, told me everything I needed to know. "Emma," I stepped closer, my voice barely a whisper. "I saw you the other night. With him." There was a sharp intake of breath, and for a moment, I thought she would deny it, that she'd try to cover it up with some excuse. But she didn't. Instead, she closed her eyes, exhaling slowly, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Michael, she opened her eyes, and in them, I saw a sadness that felt both familiar and foreign. I didn't want you to find out like this. I didn't want to hurt you. I took a step back, the room spinning around me as the full weight of her words sank in. It was real. The betrayal, the distance, everything that had been clawing at me for months, it was all real. She had crossed a line, one that could never be undone. How long? My voice was barely audible, each word scraping painfully against my throat. A few months, she replied quietly, her face etched with regret. It wasn't planned, Michael. I never wanted this to happen. But somewhere along the way. I don't know. I lost myself. I lost us. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, all of it boiled up inside me, spilling out in a torrent of words. Lost us? Do you even know what I've sacrificed for you? For our family? My voice rose, the raw edge of my emotions cutting through the air. I've given you everything, Emma. Everything. And this is what I get in return. She flinched, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Michael, please. I know I hurt you. I know I betrayed you. But I was lost. I felt invisible, like I was fading away. You were never there, Michael. Always working, always somewhere else. And I needed to feel alive again. The words cut deeper than any knife. I wanted to scream, to tell her that I'd been there all along, that every hour I worked, every sacrifice I made was for her, for us. But as I looked at her, I realized she didn't see it that way. She never had. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Neither of us knew what to say, how to repair the shambles of our marriage. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, with nothing but emptiness below. The love I thought would last a lifetime now lay in ruins, shattered by lies and betrayal. After a long pause, Emma finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I'll leave if that's what you want, Michael. I won't make this harder than it already is. I stared at her, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, to throw her out and never look back. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the girl I'd fallen in love with, wanted to hold on, to fight for the remnants of what we once had. Emma. I don't know, I whispered, feeling the exhaustion of the past months crash over me. I don't know if I can forgive this. I don't know if I can trust you again. She nodded, her face crumpling as a tear slipped down her cheek. I understand, she said softly. And I'm sorry, Michael. For everything. That night, Emma stayed in the guest room. The house felt hollow, filled with an eerie silence that settled into every corner. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what was left of my life. The person I thought I knew, the life I thought we shared, it had all been a fragile illusion, one that had shattered with the harsh light of truth. The days that followed felt like drifting through a strange, hollow silence. Emma stayed in the guest room, and we moved through the house like strangers, careful not to cross each other's paths. I threw myself even harder into work, my night shifts becoming both a distraction and an escape from the unbearable emptiness of home. Every corner of our house felt haunted. Each room held memories of us, echoes of the laughter and love we'd once shared. I couldn't walk into the kitchen without remembering the mornings we spent together, Emma dancing to her favorite song as she made breakfast. Our daughter's laughter used to fill the living room, and Emma would join in, both of them lighting up the room. Now, it was quiet, so painfully quiet that I found myself leaving earlier each night, escaping the weight of the silence. But worst of all was our daughter. She didn't understand why her mother slept in a different room, or why I was gone longer than usual. She would ask, with her innocent eyes, if her mom and dad were mad at each other. The guilt weighed heavily on my heart, knowing that no matter how much I tried to shield her from the pain, she felt it too. One night, as I was tucking her into bed, she looked up at me with a question I wasn't ready for. "Daddy, why don't you and Mommy hug each other anymore?" I froze, forcing a smile to hide the ache in my chest. "Sometimes, grown-ups just need a little time, sweetheart. But I love you, and I'm always here for you." She seemed to accept the answer, but her small arms wrapped around my neck tighter than ever, as if she could sense that something was breaking inside me. Holding her close, I promised myself that, no matter what happened between Emma and me, I would always be here for our daughter. As the weeks dragged on, the distance between Emma and I only grew wider. She'd begun to avoid eye contact, and her apologies felt hollow, like words repeated over and over until they lost all meaning. The trust that once held us together had crumbled, leaving behind a vast emptiness that neither of us knew how to fill. One evening, after I had returned home, Emma asked if we could talk. We sat across from each other in the living room, the air heavy with unspoken words. Her face was drawn, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I want to try to make this right, Michael," she began, her voice soft but determined. "I know I broke your trust, and I know I hurt you. But, if there's even a chance for us, I want to fight for it." I looked at her, feeling a surge of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a strange sense of relief. I'd wanted to hear these words, to believe that there was something left to salvage. But trust, once shattered, doesn't heal easily. "Emma, it's not that simple," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I don't know if I can forgive you, or if I can ever see you the same way. You betrayed me, you broke the promises we made to each other." She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But if we walk away now, then all these years, everything we built together, it will be gone. I don't want our daughter to grow up in a broken home. I want to try. Michael. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Hearing her say those words, I felt the anger in me give way, just a little, to something softer, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. I wanted to believe her, to trust that she was sincere. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing under that streetlight with another man, her smile, her warmth, all things I thought belonged only to me. "How do I know you won't do this again, Emma?" The question escaped before I could stop it, my voice tinged with bitterness. "How do I know this isn't just another lie?" She looked down, her fingers tracing the lines of her hands as if searching for an answer. "I don't have an excuse, Michael. And I know I don't deserve your trust. But I'm willing to rebuild it, piece by piece, however long it takes. I'll do anything to prove that I want to make things right." A part of me wanted to reach out, to give in to the glimmer of hope she offered. But the other part, the part that had spent sleepless nights haunted by the memory of her betrayal, held me back. I knew that if I opened myself up to her again, if I let down the walls I had built to protect myself, I would be risking everything. I looked at her, seeing the woman I once loved and the stranger she had become. I could feel the weight of my decision, knowing that whatever choice I made would shape the future for all of us. Finally, I spoke, my voice barely a whisper. "Emma, I don't know if I can ever forget what happened. But, for the sake of our daughter, and because a part of me still wants to believe in us, I'm willing to try." Her face lit up with a fragile smile, a mixture of relief and gratitude. She reached out to take my hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't pull away. But as I held her hand, I knew this was only the beginning of a long, painful road. Rebuilding what we had would take time, patience, and a strength I wasn't sure I possessed. But for now, in this small moment, it felt like a tiny step forward. As we sat together in silence, a tentative hope began to flicker in the space between us. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning, a fragile, trembling chance to rebuild the life we'd once shared, one piece at a time. In the months that followed, Emma and I began the painstaking work of piecing together the fragments of our broken marriage. It was far from easy. Each day brought with it reminders of the hurt, scars that seemed to reopen with the slightest touch. But underneath the pain, a quiet determination took root, a commitment to rebuild, not just for our daughter, but for the life we'd once dreamed of together. Emma started to open up to me in ways she hadn't in years. She told me about the loneliness she'd felt, her struggle with the weight of our routines, and her own regret for the choices she had made. And for the first time, I shared my fears, the pressures I had shouldered in silence, thinking they were mine alone to bear. Those were conversations we should have had years ago, but somehow, in the midst of our pain, they became the bridge that pulled us closer together. We went to counseling, something I'd never imagined myself doing. Each session forced us to confront parts of ourselves that were difficult to face, the resentment, the unspoken needs, the sacrifices that had built walls between us instead of bonding us closer. Slowly, we learned to listen to each other again, to rebuild the trust we'd lost, one small act at a time. For our daughter, these changes brought a quiet relief. I could see it in her eyes, the way she watched us carefully, as if looking for signs that the family she knew was truly coming back together. And as Emma and I grew stronger, so did our bond with her, our shared moments filled with a warmth that felt even more precious now, knowing how close we'd come to losing it all. But trust is a fragile thing, and no matter how hard we tried, the shadows of the past still lingered. There were nights when I lay awake, wondering if I'd ever be able to let go completely, if I could ever look at Emma and not see the betrayal etched into her eyes. And yet, even in those moments, I knew that my love for her had not faded. If anything, it had deepened, shaped by the struggles we'd endured, by the wounds we'd chosen to heal together. One evening, nearly a year after the night I'd first confronted her, Emma and I stood on the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle against the darkened sky. It was a quiet, peaceful moment, one of those rare times when words weren't necessary. She reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine, and for the first time, I felt a sense of wholeness, a fragile yet resilient bond that had been rebuilt piece by piece. We didn't speak, but the silence between us held a shared understanding, a recognition of the pain we'd caused each other, and the strength it had taken to forgive. "I'm proud of us," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet sincerity that touched something deep within me. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved, lost, and fought to regain, and for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, and I knew that the scars of the past would always be a part of us. But they no longer held us back. Instead, they had become a testament to our resilience, a reminder of the strength we'd found in each other, even in the darkest of times. "I am too," I replied softly, squeezing her hand as we stood together, gazing out at the city that had witnessed our trials, our heartache, and ultimately, our rebirth. In that moment, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. We had been broken, shattered by betrayal and mistrust, but from the ruins, we had built something new, a love forged not from perfection, but from endurance, forgiveness, and the quiet strength that comes from choosing each other again, day after day.